Who was the bloodiest dictator of the 20th century? Hitler? Stalin, maybe. How about Mao? Maybe. But what if I told you there was a dictator, less famous, less talked about, who may have personally ordered the murder of 500,000 of his own citizens and got away with it? His name was Idi Amin. And while the world watched, he turned Uganda into a killing field, stuffed his fridge with severed heads, and called himself Conqueror of the British Empire. But how did he rise to power from being a cook in the army? And how did he stay there for 8 blood-soaked years? Let's discuss it in today's episode of History Lights. Idi Amin Dada wasn't born a president or even a politician. He started at the very bottom. Born around 1925 in Kiboko in northwest Uganda to a Kakwa Muslim family, he had almost no formal education and could barely read or write. In 1946, he joined the colonial British Army as an assistant cook, basically a kitchen helper in uniform. But Amin was huge, 6 feet 4 inches tall, and naturally athletic. In fact, he became Uganda's light heavyweight boxing champion in 1951 and held the title for 9 years straight. He was also an avid rugby player, known for bulldozing through opponents. His imposing size and brute strength made an impression, though one British officer joked that Amin was virtually bone from the neck up, implying brawn clearly outweighed brains. Still, charisma and brute force took him a long way. By 1961, despite education virtually nil, Amin's British commanders promoted him to be one of the first 2 black Ugandan officers. Uganda gained independence in 1962, and Amin's military career kept climbing. He became a close ally of Prime Minister, later President, Milton Obote, who entrusted him with key missions. Amin helped Obote quash a mutiny and even led an attack on the palace of the King of Buganda in 1966, which boosted Amin's legend among some Ugandans. Obote elevated Amin to Army Commander in 1965 and overall Chief of the Armed Forces by 1970. Beneath the camaraderie, though, distrust was brewing. Rumors swirled about Amin's brutality in earlier operations, including a 1962 massacre of Kenyan tribesmen that was quietly swept under the rug. By 1970, Obote suspected Amin of misusing army funds and plotted to arrest him. Sensing danger, General Idi Amin decided to strike first, setting the stage for a coup that would put him, improbably, at the helm of Uganda. Chapter 2: Africa's Last Hope. On January 25, 1971, while President Obote was away at a conference, Idi Amin seized his moment. He launched a military coup and took control of Kampala in a near-bloodless power grab. Tanks rolled through the streets, soldiers blocked airports and roads, and Radio Uganda crackled with announcements that Obote's corrupt regime had been overthrown. Cheering crowds actually poured into the streets of the capital upon hearing the news, a testament to how unpopular Obote had become. Amin, presenting himself as a plain-spoken soldier and savior, promised this was a caretaker government only. He vowed to hold free elections as soon as the country was stable, and even promised to release political prisoners to signal a new dawn. For many Ugandans, and even some foreign observers, the coup felt like a positive change. One U.S. diplomatic report noted Ugandans were generally relieved and welcoming of Amin in those early days, hoping he would restore civilian rule and end Obote's abuses. Amin certainly saw himself as a liberator. He declared he had come to save Uganda from tyranny and frequently portrayed himself as a champion of the common man. In later propaganda, he went so far as to call himself the last king of Scotland. Yes, Scotland. More on that later. And even the last hope of Africa, positioning himself as the continent's savior. These grandiose claims weren't official titles, but they reflected Amin's growing ego. In reality, behind the celebratory facade of 1971, Amin was already moving swiftly to consolidate absolute power. Within days of the coup, he proclaimed himself president, commander-in-chief, and head of the armed forces, titles he had no intention of ever relinquishing. Uganda was now under military rule, and the man who started as a lowly bodyguard turned cook had grabbed the highest seat in the land. The question was, what kind of ruler would Idi Amin be? It wouldn't take long to find out, and the butcher of Uganda would soon reveal himself. Chapter 3: Butcher's Power Purges. Amin wasted no time shedding his benign mask. Almost immediately, he began a brutal purge of the military and anyone suspected of loyalty to ex-President Abo. Abo hailed from the Longi tribe and was supported by the Acholi people. Amin, by contrast, was from the Kakwa, a smaller Nilotic group. In his first weeks as president, Amin ordered soldiers from the Acholi and Longi ethnic groups to be rounded up. They were imprisoned. Many more were executed or disappeared. In March 1971, just 6 weeks after the coup, a horrific incident at Makindye military prison gave Ugandans a taste of the new regime's terror. 32 captured soldiers, mostly Acholi and Longi officers, were crammed into a cell and killed with a charge of dynamite, blown up in mass. Observers later estimated that in Amin's first year of rule, roughly 2/3 of the entire Ugandan army were executed, on the order of 6,000 soldiers out of 9,000. This was essentially an ethnic cleansing within the armed forces, eliminating anyone who might oppose Amin. The pattern was set for the mass bloodletting to come. The purges extended beyond soldiers. High-ranking officials who served the previous government started vanishing as well. In September 1972, Chief Justice Benedicto Kiwanaka, a former prime minister, was dragged from his chambers by Amin's henchmen and murdered. A few years later, in 1977, the Anglican Archbishop Janini Luwum, an outspoken critic of the regime, was killed under suspicious circumstances. The government absurdly claimed he died in a car accident, but it was widely understood that Amin ordered his death. Cabinet ministers, academics, journalists, no one was safe. Amin's State Research Bureau, the SRB, ostensibly an intelligence agency, became notorious for hunting down and torturing regime opponents. By late 1972, President Amin had made it clear that his earlier promises of democracy were void. He declared himself president for life, formally adopting that title in 1976, and promoted himself to field marshal. With absolute power in his grasp, Amin ruled through fear. As a U.S. State Department brief described him at the time, he was uneducated, irresponsible, paranoid, and racist, a volatile combination that Uganda was now suffering firsthand. In 1972, exiled supporters of Abo attempted a small invasion from neighboring Tanzania, hoping to topple Amin. Amin's forces repelled this attack, but it only fed his paranoia. He took revenge, not just on the rebels, but on civilians suspected of disloyalty. Entire villages in the West Nile region, Amin's home area, saw violence as the regime settled scores. By Amin's own warped logic, terror was a tool to cement his rule. A secret State Department cable from 1973 noted that an unruly army has terrorized the country, and that Amin's purge had removed nearly all soldiers who weren't from his own clique. The killings in 1971 through 72 likely claimed thousands of lives. U.S. officials estimated at least 4,000 to 5,000 tribal killings in the first year. And this was only the beginning. Amin had tasted absolute power, and he was willing to eliminate anyone to keep it. The bloodbath had begun in earnest, and ordinary Ugandans were about to learn just how terrifying life under a mad dictator could be. Chapter 4. Terror State Established. For everyday Ugandans, Idi Amin's 8-year rule wasn't just terrifying. It was a waking nightmare. People vanished without warning. Families whispered in fear, dreading the infamous late-night knock. At the center of the terror was the State Research Bureau, SRB, a plain pink building in Kampala that functioned as Amin's personal torture and execution chamber. Prisoners, often detained for no reason, were tortured, crammed 60 to a cell, and forced to live beside rotting corpses. Survivor Reverend George Lakwaya described it as pure hell. Beatings from drugged guards, no food, no water. So desperate that inmates drank urine. Every day, one of those men would either die or be murdered, he recalled. Amin built an entire ecosystem of fear, stacking agencies like the Presidential Guard, military police, and SRB against each other. Everyone spied. No one felt safe. According to Amnesty International, as many as 300,000 to 500,000 Ugandans were killed, some strangled with piano wire, others shot and dumped in the Nile River. The regime didn't care who you were: rich, poor, Christian, Muslim, doctor, teacher. People were killed for their ethnicity, faith, job, or simply because they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. Uganda became a nation of mass graves, soaked in blood and silence. As one survivor put it, "We feared the midnight knock more than anything." Amin didn't just rule Uganda. He brutalized it. His nickname, the Butcher of Uganda, wasn't hyperbole. It was earned, horrifically. Chapter 5. Economic collapse follows. Even as he brutalized his people, Idi Amin also wrecked Uganda's economy, and nothing did more damage than the mass expulsion of Uganda's Asian minority in August 1972. Overnight, around 50,000 to 60,000 South Asians, many of whose family had lived in Uganda for generations, were given 90 days to leave the country. Their only crime? Being successful. Amin claimed the expulsion came to him in a prophetic dream. These Asians ran much of Uganda's economy, including banks, pharmacies, shops, and factories. When they were forced out, Amin handed their businesses to loyalists and soldiers, many of whom had zero experience. Chaos followed. One example, a cement plant collapsed, literally, because the new managers didn't know how to clean the filters. Production across industries plummeted. Between 1970 and 1978, Uganda's export crops, like coffee and cotton, fell over 50%, and industrial output followed. Inflation exploded to nearly 200% per year, and basic goods became unaffordable. Sugar hit $5 per pound. Gasoline soared to $39 per gallon, while the average civil servant made just $30 a month. With reserves gone, Amin simply printed money, worsening inflation. Corruption was out of control. His cronies looted the treasury, even flying abroad with suitcases full of cash. To survive, desperate citizens smuggled goods and coffee, only to face Amin's so-called anti-corruption squad, which extorted or killed them. By the late 70s, Uganda's economy was a disaster zone. Hospitals, schools, and roads collapsed. Even Amin's own officials admitted the Asian expulsion was catastrophic. But Amin, he lived lavishly, while Uganda crumbled. Chapter 6. The Delusional Butcher. By the mid-1970s, Idi Amin's rule had descended into a grotesque blend of absurdity and horror. He built a cult of personality, granting himself wild titles like Conqueror of the British Empire, after the UK cut ties with Uganda. His full honorific, yes, read on state radio, included phrases like, "Lord of all the beasts of the earth and fishes of the sea." Fake medals adorned his uniform, and he delighted in ridiculous displays of power, like hijacking the police band's baton to play conductor. But behind the clownish theater was chilling violence. Rumors swirled that Amin was a cannibal, and his own aides later claimed he kept severed heads in his fridge. One of his wives was found dismembered, allegedly on his orders. Most shockingly, Amin once openly bragged in an interview, "I have eaten human meat. It's very salty." Delusions of grandeur extended beyond Uganda. A Muslim convert, Amin dreamed of leading the Islamic world, aligning with Libya's Gaddafi, and denouncing Israel and Britain. He chaired the Organization of African Unity in 1975 through 76, but was widely mocked. In a 1976 telegram, he praised Hitler for the Holocaust, triggering global outrage and confirming his international pariah status. At home, Amin surrounded himself with loyal death squads and ruled through fear. He had 6 wives and fathered over 30 children, often marrying across tribes to appear inclusive, while killing indiscriminately. By 1977, even his allies were disillusioned. The economy was shattered, the army terrified, and Amin, Uganda's self-proclaimed Big Daddy, was spiraling fast towards collapse. Chapter 7: Hostages, Heroes, and Humiliation. In June 1976, Idi Amin made a move that would shatter his global image. An Air France flight from Tel Aviv to Paris was hijacked by 4 terrorists, 2 German, 2 Palestinian, and rerouted to Entebbe Airport in Uganda. Amin welcomed the hijackers, gave them Ugandan troops for backup, and posed as a mediator while colluding behind the scenes. He released some passengers, but held on to the Jewish and Israeli hostages, threatening their lives. Then on July 4th, Israel pulled off Operation Entebbe, a jaw-dropping rescue mission. Israeli commandos flew 2,500 miles, stormed the airport, killed the hijackers, and about 20 Ugandan soldiers, and rescued 102 out of the 106 hostages in under 90 minutes. The only Israeli casualty was Yonatan Netanyahu, the mission commander. Amin was humiliated. In a fit of rage, he ordered the murder of Dora Bloch, a 74-year-old hostage recovering in a Kampala hospital. She was dragged from her bed and killed. Hospital staff who tried to protect her were also executed. Her charred remains were later found buried on a plantation. The world was horrified. Britain immediately cut all ties with Uganda. Amin responded by awarding himself the absurd title, Conqueror of the British Empire. But the damage was done. International sympathy vanished, and even Arab allies backed away. The Entebbe raid not only exposed Amin as weak and foolish, but it also shook his own military. His aura of invincibility cracked. As one observer put it, Entebbe showed Idi Amin was not invulnerable, and he couldn't stand that. Chapter 8: Tanzania War and Overthrow. Want to understand the world better? Start with history and subscribe to our channel. By 1978, Uganda was collapsing. Amin's army was demoralized, and many soldiers had fled, often to Tanzania, ruled by his fiercest critic, President Julius Nyerere. With the economy in ruins and international aid dried up, Amin made a disastrous move. He invaded Tanzania. In October 1978, he claimed that Tanzania's Conqueror salient belonged to Uganda and sent troops to loot and occupy the region. But Amin underestimated Nyerere. Tanzania launched a counteroffensive, joined by thousands of Ugandan exiles. Amin's poorly trained army crumbled. By April 1979, Tanzanian tanks rolled into Kampala. Amin fled by helicopter, first to Libya, then to Saudi Arabia, where he was granted exile on the condition that he remain politically silent. The Libyan troops sent by Muammar Gaddafi didn't fare any better. 400 were killed. As the capital fell, Colonel Oyai Ojak, a Ugandan rebel commander, symbolically led the charge to retake the city. On April 13, 1979, Ugandans celebrated the end of Idi Amin's brutal 8-year reign. In Saudi Arabia, Amin lived a quiet life in Jeddah, with a villa, a generous stipend, and zero accountability. He never expressed remorse, reportedly spending his days fishing, lifting weights, and spinning tales, still wearing his old military beret as if nothing had changed. Back in Uganda, the scale of destruction was jaw-dropping. Mass graves, millions in debt, and just $200,000 left in the treasury. Naya Year quipped that Amin had driven Uganda's bus off a cliff. Now it was up to Ugandans to pull it back up. Amin escaped justice, but his legacy left an entire nation traumatized and struggling to rebuild. Chapter 9: Death, Exile, and Putrid Legacy. Idi Amin died in exile in Saudi Arabia on August 16, 2003, nearly 24 years after fleeing Uganda. Despite overseeing one of the most brutal regimes of the 20th century, he never faced trial for the 300,000 to 500,000 deaths linked to his rule. He spent his final years fishing, working out, and spinning tales of his former glory, insisting he would only return to Uganda as president. He never did. Amin died quietly of multiple organ failure in Jeddah at around age 78. His burial was low-key, attended by a small handful of relatives. Uganda's then president, Yoweri Museveni, considered repatriating his body, but ultimately left him buried in exile. For many Ugandans, his death brought relief. A grim chapter finally closed. But there was also frustration that he had escaped justice, dying in comfort, while so many had suffered. Survivors and human rights groups had spent years collecting testimonies of Amin's crimes. The brutality was beyond dispute, and yet a small fringe of Ugandans expressed nostalgia, praising Amin for things like restoring pride or expelling Asians, sentiments largely dismissed as historical amnesia. His legacy remains one of national trauma. Uganda, already fragile in the 1970s, was left in ruins by his rule. It took decades of leadership under Museveni to begin healing and rebuilding. To this day, Ugandan schoolchildren learn about Amin's atrocities, and a Human Rights Commission helps document the pain he inflicted. Globally, Amin is grouped with history's worst tyrants: Hitler, Stalin, and Pol Pot. His story is told in books, documentaries, and Hollywood, most famously in The Last King of Scotland. But beyond the theatrics and cruelty, his reign serves as a warning: how power, unchecked, can transform a man into a monster and a nation into a graveyard. If Idi Amin had faced trial like other war criminals, would the world remember him differently? Or do some dictators get off too easy simply because they die in exile? Let us know in the comments below. Here's another video history buffs enjoyed watching. Goodbye for now.